The current government promises better education as a whole through its conditional cash transfer program that funds school expenses of the poorest Filipinos. Strengthened alternative learning system, skill-based training such as TESDA, the controversial K-12 program, and zero backlog in classrooms. But at the heart of this progress lies a problem unresolved: the confusion on the language of instruction that must be used in schools. The Philippine Constitution, Article 14, Sections 6 and 7 say that Filipino is the national language and must be used as the language of instruction. But the bilingual education policy that was implemented back in 1974 allegedly sowed confusion in the instruction mechanism in schools. According to studies, the English proficiency of Filipino students has declined over the years. Statistics say only 26%, or a little over a quarter, of 6th graders have a mastery of English, where mastery is defined as obtaining a score of 75% or higher in English. In high school, only 7% of students have mastery of English, and in college, only 2 to 7% of graduates who apply for positions in business process outsourcing or BPOs show English mastery. And even then, they have to undergo another 3 months of training to increase their competence. Such is the plight of the education system, coupled with confusion on the medium of instruction.
Welcome to Opposing Views, a hard, straightforward discussion of today's most pressing issues. Article 4, Section 6 of the Philippine Constitution says, the national language of the Philippines is Filipino, and it must be the language of instruction too. But with the rising demands of being globally competitive, the academe has to adjust as well, making English as another language of education. Let's weigh in tonight. Our question, should we promote Filipino more than English as the medium of instruction in schools? Good evening, I'm Rod Nepomuceno, and this is Opposing Views. All right, joining us tonight in our discussion is Representative Romulo, Chairman of the House Committee on Higher and Technical Education. Good evening, Congressman.
Good evening, Rod.
Yeah, can you give us, in 30 seconds, give us a summary of your position in that debate question? You think that Filipino should be promoted more than English in our schools?
Well, sa ngayon kasi, Rod, ang kailangan talaga medyo may balance tayong gawin tungkol dito. Because katulad na nabanggit mo sa introduction, talagang kaya tayo may K-12 Because isang concern ng gobyerno ay yung mga students natin na maging competitive domestically and internationally. Pero tama rin po yung nabanggit niyo sa introduction, meron tayong constitutional mandate na kailangan bigyan ng gobyerno ng promotion yung Filipino as a national language, as a medium of instruction. So may balance po na kailangan gawin talaga.
Okay. All right. We have also with us Professor Danilo Arao, columnist and secretary of the University of the Philippines Diliman College of Mass Communication. Good evening, Dan.
Yeah, good evening, Rod.
Yeah, your quick thoughts on the debate question. You think Filipino should be promoted more than English?
Well, as a teacher, I believe that Filipino should be given the attention that it really deserves, given that it's the national language, and that this is the medium of communication that's understood by majority of Filipinos. Now, as regards English, it could be taught as a secondary language. We should be producing polyglots or multilingual people, and English could be one of the many languages that could be learned by people, especially now that, as you mentioned a while ago, we are in the process of internationalizing.
Right. Okay. Let's start our discussion. It's interesting that when I was asking both of you, and you're saying that Filipino should be the one, and I asked the congressman, and you spoke in Filipino, and you spoke in English.
Well, I'm only answering on the basis of the question that you're asking.
That's right.
That's how my mother taught me anyway. Pero pwede din naman ako magsalita sa wikang Filipino kung kinakailangan.
That's right. Okay. Well, for purposes of our show today, or tonight, rather, we can discuss in both English and Filipino.
Okay.
So let's start off with the first question. Which one is a better medium? And I'll ask the congressman first, Congressman Roman. Which one is a better medium of instruction, English or Filipino?
Well, sa ngayon, Rod, may kita po natin katulad ng experience natin sa UP. sa University of the Philippines, marami po dyan ng mga professors natin, sa totoo lang, in the exercise of their academic freedom, minsan tinuturo nila yung subjects nila in Filipino, meron nagtuturo in English. In fact, kahit ang mathematics, meron na tayong mga teachers sa UP na nagtuturo ng mathematics in Tagalog, in Filipino.
Alright, okay.
So, ang sagot ko po sa question po niyo, talagang at this point, it's really parang case-to-case basis eh. Ang tingin ko, ang pinaka-importante tingnan kung ano yung pinaka makakapag-communicate tayo na matuturuan yung estudyante.
But Congressman, won't that cause more confusion if you're leaving it up to them? Parang let the schools decide. Parang will there be more confusion and no standardization? Ika nga.
Sa akin, iba yung usapin na kung pag-uusapan natin na kung kailangan ba na may minimum man lang para may promotion of Filipino as our national language. At iba rin yung usapin kung pag-uusapan natin as a medium of instruction. Kasi kung medium of instruction, ang pinaka-importante po sa atin ngayon ay masigurado na yung ating mga mag-aaral ay competitive. Magiging competitive sila kung may matututunan sila. Kung ang tingin ng isang, in the exercise of their academic freedom, ang tingin ng professor o ng teacher ay mas matututunan at mas mako-communicate nila yung subject matter, siguro at mandated ng Constitution that we have to respect the academic freedom of our higher education institutions.
All right. Okay, now Professor Dan, in your mind, do you think Filipino is a better medium for instruction for sa ating mga kababataan?
Well, of course, for the youth, it's important to learn the language first and to strengthen it. Now, to be fair, in the K-12 program, we have a situation where the mother tongue instruction is employed in the early grades, and that Filipino is also being taught at the higher grade levels. However, in order to intellectualize the language, it's necessary not to ignore it at the tertiary level. While there is no debate with Congressman Romulo as regards the need to be competitive, we have to remember that education is not just about job opportunities or career advancement. It's about increasing knowledge, having the passion for the arts, the humanities, producing people who may not be able to earn well in the global market, but at least they have a sense of pride and a sense of identity.
National identity. Yeah, I was going to talk about that,
Kaya
the language.
Tama yun. Kaya nga sa kontekstong ito, kung mamarapatin mo magsalita ako sa wikang Filipino, nakikita po natin yung kahalagahan ng wika sa pagpapaunlad ng sariling identidad at sa pakikipagkaisa ng ordinaryong mamamayan sa mas marami pa. Kasi anuman ang ating isipin sa Ingles, pwede nating sabihin na ang mga Cebuano at yung mga taga Mindanao ay mas gusto nila ang wikang Ingles. Ginagalang naman po natin yon. At di naman natin sinasabing wag nang pag-aralan ang wikang Ingles. Pero nakasaad po kasi sa ating saligang batas na ang Filipino ay national language. Ibig sabihin ito ay lingua franca. At dapat nating tulungan ito para magkaroon ng natural na ebolusyon tungo sa pagkakaisa ng iba't ibang wika para meron na lang tayo na isang lingua franca.
Okay.
It's just like what's happening in Spain, for example. You have different kinds of Spanish languages, but there's a common language, which is Spanish. The same is true with the Chinese, for example.
Yeah, Chinese and
you have
Japan,
Mandarin.
I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So there may be certain variations to the language, but we're able to communicate well. And that's what's happening. For example, if I'm a Tagalog person going to Bicol, I may not be able to speak well the Bicol language, but I can understand contextually certain words. I know that masiramon means masarap, for example, through constant communication.
And you think that's important in the sense of just promoting national unity and national identity?
Yes,
and that's more important than let's say, being competitive in the international market?
Yes, I believe so, because we can be outward-looking eventually, but right now, in terms of our economic status, in terms of our political economic status, we have to look at first what we need as a nation. And as a professor from the College of Mass Communication, I see the need to communicate well with our audience. And that's the reason why my stand is Filipino should be strengthened all the more. And once we make things optional, whether at the basic education level or at the tertiary education level, people would prefer English more because of the general outward-looking attitude, because that's how the government sees.
All right, Congressman Roman, Professor Dan made a good point that the language, at least the Filipino language, is the symbol of unity. No? And he cited examples, of course, Spain, Japan, China, and I think according to his point, We have to make that, establish that first before we even think of having another primary language like English and promoting our, I guess, our citizens to be globally competitive.
Sangayon naman ako dun sa nasabi ni ni professor, pero sana maintindihan rin po natin yung problema. Kasi aside from the fact na may concern tayo of promoting Filipino as our national language, meron rin tayong isang concern. At yun naman yung nabanggit mo rin kanina, yung employment. Yung para sa ating mga kababayan. Marami pa rin talaga ang naghahanap ng kanilang employment. Wala akong nakitang problema na balanse yung pag-promote ng pareho. Kasi at the end of the day, sa ngayon po, bilang chairman ng Committee on Higher and Technical Education, pag nakakapag-imbita po kami ng mga teachers, lalo na galing sa probinsya, alam niyo, may common concern talaga eh. Meron silang binabanggit na ang problema nila sa kanilang mga probinsya, sa kanilang mag-aaral, lalo na sa public schools, ay poverty. Talagang nahihirapan yung mag-aaral nila dahil hindi masuportahan ng pamilya at yung support ng gobyerno financially ay minimal naman raw. So hindi natin ma-develop completely. So at the end of the day, kailangan talagang balanse, kailangan sabay natin ma-promote. And I don't think that is impossible. Tingin ko, may pagkakataon tayo, lalo na ngayon, na very active naman po yung academe natin, yung education sector natin, very active ang CHED, and Congress is trying to be as active as it can on this issue para mapag-usapan. Sabay, kailangan may balanse po eh. Kailangan sabay talaga ma-promote. I think wala tayong problema. Lahat tayo gusto natin na magkaroon tayo ng national identity, magka-pride tayo sa, mas lalo magka-pride tayo sa ating bansa. Pero kailangan rin natin isipin yung mga nangangailangan rin ng tulong. May ibang concern eh.
No, Professor Dan?
Well, wala naman pong problema dun sa sinasabi ninyo na yung Ingles ay kinakailangan sa pagtatrabaho, lalo na sa usapin ng pagpasok sa business process outsourcing. Kaya lang ang tanong kasi sa puntong ito, Rod, Congressman, ay ano po ba ang klase ng trabaho na gusto nating ibigay sa ating mga kababayan kung tayo ay parating aasa sa services sector, lalo na sa BPO, napakaliit ng benepisyo na pwedeng makuha ng mga mamamayan natin. Bagamat, aaminin ko, mataas ang sweldo. In fact, yung ibang mga taga-UP ay napupunta rin sa BPO. Ang punto rito, ang klase ng trabaho na dekalidad na dapat na ibibigay natin ay hindi natutugunan ng mabuti ng gobyerno, kaya napipilitan silang pumasok sa BPO. Kung tutuusin po, kung tayo ay magpo-produce ng mga inhinyero, ng mga siyentista, pwede namang palakasin yung ating wika sa pamamagitan ng pagtuturo ng siyensya at ng matematika. At yun yung dapat nating pagtuunan ng pansin. Wala po tayong problema sa sinasabi po ninyong balanse sa edukasyon, kaya lang ang realidad po kasi talaga sa akademya, Congressman, at alam po ninyo ito, kailangan nating magkaroon ng pagkakaisa kung ano yung pangunahing medium ng pagtuturo.
Kasi at this point, hindi pa nga, as I understand hindi pa na-establish talaga ang Filipino language in a sense.
Yes, that's exactly my point.
How old is it? 1935. It was based in Tagalog mainly, di ba?
Yeah. But, under Lope K. Santos.
Correct.
Now, under the Philippine Constitution, what's clear is that the medium of instruction is supposed to be Filipino.
Right.
However, and I think that's where the challenge in Congress lies, there has to be an enabling law to ensure that Filipino will be the medium of instruction.
Even if you have the Constitution, hindi lang basta-basta yan.
Because there's a restrictive clause there subject to
subject
the
to
provisions provided by law, which is still in existence
Now, are
at
you in
present.
favor, Professor Dan, are you in favor of a bilingual education policy?
Well, we have to look at the definition of bilingualism first. For example, there's nothing wrong with teaching other foreign languages like English, Spanish, or French. When I was in college, I had 12 units of Spanish and 6 units of French. Okay? But as far as teaching the other subjects, my belief is that Filipino should be used. And we've had successful case studies. For example, in the UP Integrated School, where Filipino is used as a medium of instruction, we're able to teach, for example, Ibong Adarna, even at such a very early grade level. And the students there, learn mathematics and science equally, if not much better, than their counterparts in the private schools.
Filipino.
Using Filipino, exactly. So we're able to do that.
Right.
So,
Congressman Roman,
yeah,
do you believe, how about you? Do you believe in a bilingual education policy?
Rod, before I answer that, I just want to address yung isang nabanggit kasi kanina about yung edukasyon natin, kailangan rin natin i-uplift para yung ating mga mamamayan ay makakuha nung sinasabi natin na mga professional jobs. In fact, ngayon, based on statistics, sa 1.4 million na college graduates natin, both sa private and public education natin, high schools, more or less, ang pumapasok lang ng kolehiyo, kalahati na lang nun, 700,000. And it has been, studies have shown na yung mga bansa na actually nag-implement nung K-12 ay napa-increase nila yung bilang ng mga estudyante nagtapos ng high school na pumapasok sa kolehiyo. Para sa atin, para maingat yung buhay ng ating mga mamamayan, kailangan talaga ay ma-encourage natin silang pumasok ng kolehiyo. Pero nandito po tayo sa issue na nagdagdag tayo ng 2 taon sa K-12, di ba? Actually, 3 years in fact yung sa kinder, pero 2 taon. Alam natin na pag pinag-uusapan, mabigat talaga yan eh. Lalo na sa public schools natin, sa mga mag-aaral sa public schools. Kaya ang ginawa ang nangyayari po dyan, hino-hope natin na bagamat nadagdagan ng 2 taon, ma-encourage natin silang pumasok ng kolehiyo, tapos yung pagdating sa kolehiyo, mababawasan naman yung general subjects na pinapasukan nila para hindi masyadong mabigat at makakuha sila ng mga trabaho na binabanggit ni Professor na mas ma-professionalize talaga, mas hindi yung mga nababanggit natin na hindi naman natin sinasabi na masama yun, pero hindi lang sa BPO sila pupunta, pero talaga mas professional.
Mas wide yung
mas
yung
wide
options.
yung range, yung
Alright,
options nila.
At this point, Congressman, I need to interrupt you. We need to take a short break. Meanwhile, you can react online via Facebook at facebook.com/SolarOpposingViews or tweet your comments at opposing_views. Use the hashtag #OVLanguage. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still watching Opposing Views. I'm Rod Nepomuceno. We have with us Representative Romulo and Professor Danilo Arao. Our debate question for tonight: should we promote Filipino more than English as the medium of instruction in schools? Now, I'll ask you, Professor Dan, how would you assess the students' level of proficiency in Filipino nowadays?
Well, how I wish I could give you statistics.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, for the national government, we seem to be more preoccupied with English proficiency rather than Filipino proficiency. But if you could look at certain indicators like mastery of the language, it seems that because of the failure to strengthen Filipino, people don't know certain nuances. Many people don't know certain nuances like the use of nang and nang and thou and rao. Not that we're grammar Nazis or anything, but it's just that these types of skills should be taught not just at the basic education level, but at the tertiary level, because the messaging could be affected by the flawed use of the language. And right now, culture should also be taken into account. We tend to laugh at celebrities, for example, who mangle their English.
Their English, yes.
Okay, of course, you're an exception because you speak English very well.
I hope so.
But look at celebrities who murder the Filipino language. They are perceived as cute. Especially if they're Filipino Americans. I don't want to refer to any celebrity right now, but that seems to be the case.
But that's a good point.
So it's also cultural.
You think, how would you evaluate, in your mind, the proficiency of the students nowadays?
Yes, katulad sinabi ni Professor Arao. Siguro wala po tayong datos tungkol dyan. Pero yung experience lang natin, pag naririnig natin sila, pagsasalita nila, talagang tama po eh. Talagang siguro kahit pa paano medyo may pagkukulang na rin po talaga yung pagka-focus natin at yung siguro yung inspirasyon din sa mga estudyante natin na matutunan properly ang Filipino.
Yeah. Now let's go to the CHED order, no? Which is I think the crux of our discussion. The CHED CMO says that basically said that all the Filipino languages or Filipino subjects are now put into the secondary level. So in the tertiary level, there's no more Filipino subjects, right?
Yeah, and there's even a reduction in the number of units of general education subjects, generally from 45 to 60 units to only 36 units.
Are you in favor of that?
Of course not, because under the CHED Memorandum Order, the courses now may be taught in English or Filipino. Okay? That's something that we have to clarify here. It's not pro-English, so it's a little bit ambivalent.
And by doing that, it became pro-English in a way. Yeah.
Exactly. Because, well, it's partly because of culture. Whether we deny it or not, there's still that culture of colonial mentality, not just in the academe, but in society at large. So given a choice between Filipino and English, the school administrators would choose English over Filipino.
Right.
May pagtingin kasi na ang Ingles ay diskurso para sa matalino at ang Filipino ay para sa masa o para sa mga bobo, if you want to be harsh about it.
Yeah.
So the problem with that particular order is that it is inconsistent with what is prescribed in the Constitution, wherein we have to strengthen the national language as it evolves. Okay, we have to ensure that the various languages will become an amalgamation of the lingua franca that we're pushing for.
Congressman, do you think there's a conflict here between the CHED, CMO, and the Constitution?
Well, ganito po yan. Let me also, I think, explain a little. Kasi yung paggawa ng CMO ng CHED, yan po walang kinalaman dyan ng Kongreso. Yan talaga, ang CMO na yan, under the law, kailangan maglalabas ng CMO ang CHED base sa kanilang pagpupulong at pagkukonsulta ng technical panels nila sa mga affected na mga sektor. Ang pagkaintindi ko, during the committee hearings, ay nagkonsulta po yung mga technical panels ng CHED sa iba-ibang mga sektor, katulad nung sektor nila professor, nagkonsulta sila at kaya lumabas itong CMO nila. Pero pagkalabas ng CMO po na yan, dyan po namin narinig sa Kongreso na may mga nagsulat sa amin na sinasabi na nakalimutan na completely ang Filipino sa tertiary level. Yeah. Kaya ngayon actually Rod, nandun kami sa state na ito sa committee namin right now. Because ang pagkakaalam namin, ang understanding namin, na pag-usapan na yan dapat sa technical panels ng mga sektor na maapektuhan at ng CHED. At itong CMO na ito ay produkto ng pag-uusap ng mga sektor na yun.
But on its face, do you think that it kind of violates the Constitution?
Sa parte naman po namin kasi, kung napag-usapan na ng mga sektor na apektado at tingin nila, dahil basically ang ginawa ng CHED at ng DepEd, lahat ng Filipino subjects na dating nasa tertiary level, binabayan sa senior high school. More or less 240 hours ang ituturo na Filipino now sa senior high schools. Lahat po yun, so, dapat na-discuss yun ng mahusay sa mga affected sectors. At yun yung para sa amin, kung natanggap ng mga sektor na tingin nila na hindi kabawasan yun, sino naman po kami? Sila nga po ang mismong nandoon sa sektor na yun na inaalagaan po nila yung party na yun.
Professor Dan, your thoughts on that?
Well, in terms of process, perhaps the congressman should know that the consultations were there, but they were quite selective. And basically, these are just information dissemination mechanisms, and there's not much room for discourse, question and answer, scrutinizing even the implications of such moves by the Commission on Higher Education. So in terms of process, it's also questionable, and of course, we're also questioning the substance here. Now, what we need to stress at this particular point is that the Commission on Higher Education seems to be violating the Constitution in terms of providing an enabling environment for the strengthening of Filipino. Instead of strengthening Filipino, it is further weakening it. And I think that's the reason why we are vehemently opposed to this particular CHED memorandum.
Because in this case, yes, Congressman.
Yes, Rod, para maliwanag kasi, I think talagang lahat naman ito nadadaan talaga dapat maliwanag na diskurso at pag-uusap. Kasi ang ginawa ngayon po, di ba, under K-12, binaba natin yung general subjects. Dati na nakapaloob yun lahat doon sa college general curriculum. Binaba natin yan. So ngayon, ano yung gusto natin na maibalik sa tertiary level? Will it be Filipino as a subject or will it be Filipino as a medium of instruction?
Dalawang antas po yan. Una,
two aspects, no?
Dalawang antas po yan. Una, yung aspeto ng pagtuturo ng Filipino bilang kurso at ang pagtuturo ng iba't ibang kurso sa wikang Filipino.
Yes.
Dalawa po yun. Pero kailangan din sigurong i-diin, Rod, total nabanggit na rin lang ni Congressman yung K-12, may batayang fundamental na problema rin dun sa mismong programa na K-12. Hindi lang po ito usapin ng pagpapahaba ng gastusin at ng taon dun sa basic education level, kundi pati na rin sa orientasyon ng edukasyon na gusto natin. Way back during the times of the Greeks, nung ine-establish yung academy at saka yung mga lyceum, I think we should remember that the purpose of education is to deepen the knowledge of individuals. Of course, career advancement is important, but that should not be the panacea or the be-all and end-all of education. Because if you analyze the K-12 program, the main purpose of having many of the general education courses before being put at the grades 11 and 12 levels would be to equip your workforce with the necessary quote-unquote skills and knowledge so that they won't need to go to the college level so that they can be employed right away. So we're looking at opportunities for employment when in fact we should be looking for ways to deepen the knowledge. And deepen the passion, the sense of national identity of people.
Now, in your mind, and I need to ask a question, do you think that learning Filipino up to the secondary level is enough, Professor Dan?
Right now, even as established by the K-12 program, it can never be enough because learning is always a continuing process. I can even argue that even at the doctoral level, even if you're adept in Filipino, it will still be hard for you to communicate. So this exacerbates the situation all the more where while you are trying to put certain courses in Filipino at the secondary level, you are obliterating it.
Congressman Roman, your thoughts? You think that it's sufficient, at least, well, of course, the CHED memorandum is there, but you think it's sufficient to just have Filipino up to the secondary level?
Yes. Again, Rod, importante kasi dito yung talagang maintindihan kung ano yung, I think pinaliwanag sa atin ni Professor na dalawa yan, as a medium of instruction, pangalawa, as a subject.
Correct.
Ngayon, pag-uusapan natin as a subject, anong klaseng subject? Ano yung ituturo dun sa Filipino? Kasi ang ayaw naman natin, and again, just to digress a bit, I do not agree naman na kaya tayo may K-12 para lang agad-agad na magkatrabaho. In fact, katulad na nabanggit kanina, studies have shown na nag-i-increase yung college enrollees the moment na extend, in countries na may nag-extend to K-12, nag-increase talaga yung number of students from high school na pumasok ng kolehiyo. At yun yung gusto natin. Pero again, ano yung college, ano yung college course? Kasi hindi naman natin pwedeng ulitin yung tinuro na sa senior high school. Ano naman yung ilalaman nung subject na Filipino? Para kasi
insofar as you're concerned, you think that we should still have, let's say, a subject na Filipino in college.
Because again, we're mandated to promote. But then ayaw lang natin
but you don't want that
ulitin lang. Ulitin lang natin.
Tama po yun.
Wag lang natin ulitin yung tinuro na sa senior high school.
But you're not in favor of the medium of instruction being Filipino in the tertiary level.
Sa tertiary level, katulad na nabanggit ko kanina, again, yung aspeto na yan, ang akin dyan siguro kung academic freedom, kung payagan, kung gusto ng kung tingin ng isang professor o kaya ng institusyon na mas makakatulong sila ng mabuti at mas makakapulot ng aral yung mga estudyante, okay sa akin.
So you leave it to them dapat.
I leave it to them. But again, wala rin ako problema kung maglagay ng minimum.
Okay. All right, we need to take a short break though. More on the issue of the country's medium of instruction when we come back. You're watching Opposing Views. All right, well, welcome back. You're still watching Opposing Views. I'm Rod Nepomuceno. Still with us, Representative Romulo, Chairman of the House Committee on Higher and Technical Education, and Professor Danilo Arao, columnist and Secretary of the University of the Philippines, Diliman College of Mass Communication. And our question for tonight, should we promote Filipino more than English as the medium of instruction in schools. Now, just before the break, Congressman Roman was making a point that that if he doesn't have any problem with having a Filipino language subject, no, as a tertiary level, if for as long as it's not a repeat of what's been taught already sa K-12 program. You had your own thoughts on that, Professor Dan.
Well, first of all, I think faculty member from the Filipino department will be in a better position to talk about it. But nevertheless, since I also write in Filipino and I teach in Filipino for some of my subjects, I could tell you that advanced balaril at orthograpia should be taught there because what is...
In the tertiary level?
At the tertiary level. Because grammar and orthography should be a continuing, process of learning, even at the tertiary level. Literature, Philippine literature, it's not enough to teach Philippine literature at the secondary level because there are so many bodies of work, particularly contemporary Filipino writers who should be appreciated, whose work should be appreciated well by students. And of course, the fact that semantics are not deeply discussed at the K-12 curriculum, then it should be taught also.
So do you think that these subjects that you're mentioning should be mandated or required in the tertiary level? That is your position?
Because the CHED is the one that comes up with the general education curriculum. So my assessment is that they should be strengthened and included, and aside from that, Filipino should be used as a medium of instruction. Now, just
so you want to push for that the Filipino should be
the medium of instruction. Because it's not enough to have 9 units of Filipino, but all the other courses will be taught in a language that's alien to many of us.
When you say that, you want it mandated or at least give them the freedom to...
It should be mandated, I believe, because once you give people, well, it's like this. We're all for academic freedom. I think we don't. There's no debate with Congressman Romulo as regards academic freedom, but we have to clarify that academic freedom has to do with institutional autonomy of the academe at one level, and at the level of the faculty, the freedom to give him or her the opportunity to craft the curriculum any way he or she pleases.
How he teaches and what he teaches.
But language, as far as language is concerned, while we concede that there are faculty members who are more adept in English rather than in Filipino, as a communication specialist, we adjust our language based on the needs of our audience, not the other way around. We're not it's like us telling the students, well, I'm better at English, so therefore you should live with it, and therefore you should.
So your position is mandatory. So, Congressman Roman, the feeling of the belief of Professor Dan is that the medium of instruction should be Filipino in the tertiary level. Your thoughts on that?
Well, sa akin naman, ang tingin ko dapat may balanse sa bagay na yan. Kasi hindi naman natin pwedeng imandato, lalo na nag-agree naman kami ni Professor tungkol sa academic freedom. And I think the Supreme Court has defined what academic freedom is. And that is who to teach, what to teach, how to teach. And included in how to teach is, I guess, the freedom na mag-decide sila kung ano ang language of medium of instruction. Pero, in the same light, meron din pong, nabanggit niyo po kanina at nabanggit ni Rod, merong constitutional mandate rin na sinasabi na government should promote Filipino as a medium of instruction. Tingin ko hindi naman sila salungat sa isa't isa. Ang kailangan lang, makahanap lang tayo, yung middle ground. Hindi naman pwede imamandato natin lahat ng subjects, Filipino, ituturo. Pero siguro may middle ground na kung saan pwede nating ma-fulfill at ma-promote yung Filipino as a national language. Ngayon, yung katanungan natin nga kanina, should it be as a subject or pwede bang as a medium of instruction katulad a certain number of units ituturo in Filipino? Will that be promoting Filipino? Is that sufficient? Kasi kung yes, baka naman kaya na nating ma-resolbahan yung problema tungkol sa mga bagay na yan. Alam ko hindi naman ma-resolbahan ngayon. But it's food for thought, even for people who are listening. I think meron tayong mga constitutional mandates na kailangan natin i-fulfill. Yung academic freedom at yung promotion of Filipino.
You have to find the balance on that.
The balance.
Now, okay, I have a question, Congressman Roman, and I'll ask Professor Dan to weigh in. Do you think, I know for a fact that in the House there's several bills requesting or try to promote English or proposing that English should be strengthened. Now, do you think that there's a lesser legislative support for Filipino compared to English? Because there's so many bills about promoting English, and I don't know of any other bill na trying to promote Filipino. No, kasi for example, we have English-speaking zones in schools, but no Filipino-speaking zones.
Yes.
Do you think that in terms of legislative support, there's more? It's biased towards English?
Yes. Actually, Rod, Professor, hindi ko alam kung ilan talaga ang mga bills na yan na naka-file promoting English. Pero siguro yung factual scenario naman, sa Committee on Higher and Technical Education, wala pa kami tinitake up na bill tungkol sa pag-promote ng English. In contrast to Filipino po, I think itong buwan pa lang na ito, nagkadalawang hearing na kami regarding Filipino sa tertiary level. So kung promotion or pagdidinig sa concerns, tingin ko naman sa committee ay nakikita naman po na binibigyan po natin ng kalagahan talaga.
Yung Filipino.
Yung Filipino.
In your mind, Professor Dan, do you think that's the case? I think, for example, insofar as legislative support, do you think that medyo may bias towards English rather than Filipino?
Well, through the years, and we're not just talking about the term of Congressman Romulo, English has been proposed to be the only medium of instruction at the expense of the national language, which is
that concerns you?
Yeah, and it concerns me a lot because there is a fundamental flaw even in the way Filipino is looked at. It is being used as a device to drive a wedge between the Tagalog-speaking people like the Manileños and others from Visayas and Mindanao, which should not be the case because when we say Filipino, we look at Filipino as the national language. Tagalog is just one of the many languages that we have right now.
Right.
As mentioned a while ago, we look at Filipino as lingua franca. If you look at the dictionary, what does lingua franca mean? Lingua franca means common language spoken in a country or in a place where people speak various languages. It's possible. But unfortunately, the government isn't promoting that kind of an enabling environment to ensure that we attain that. To be more concrete about it, there are efforts on the part of the University of the Philippines to promote that lingua franca through, for example, the publication of the UP Dictionaryong Filipino, which I'm sure Congressman Romulo is very familiar with. But these are just efforts of the academe. It's the government that seems to fail to do that, even on the basis of education itself. While I agree that there are countries that implemented K-12 where enrollment in college education became higher, I doubt if that will happen in the Philippines, given that the subsidy to state universities and colleges is decreasing through the years. So without adequate scholarships, I doubt if graduates of K-12 would end up at the college level.
Now, on your point, you're saying that you feel that the government is not supporting the lingua franca,
Yes.
Which is Filipino. Do you think that's the case, Congressman Roman? Do you think that the government should extend its efforts in promoting our lingua franca? Which is, you think that the government is lacking there?
I agree completely with that. Yes, we should. I think we should promote it more. We should discuss it more. Find ways in order for us to promote it. That I agree with.
But in terms of, you mentioned balance. What is are you saying it's 50-50? I mean, because you're saying dapat i-balance natin. I guess that's where my problem lies when it comes to this. My is that when you say we have to balance Filipino and English, it's a matter of degree now, diba? And when you say balance, to me it's 50-50. But what is the correct balance?
Again, case-to-case basis. Simula po ngayon, assuming we begin now, makikita naman natin na siguro may mga subjects na talagang mahirapan pa tayong maituro sa Filipino. So sa ngayon, let us make that as an English medium of instruction. Pero eventually, siguro hindi ko rin po alam, katulad ng mathematics, sa totoo lang po, na nagulat ako na natuturo na talaga siya in Filipino. So as we develop siguro the Filipino language, and as we are able to communicate that better as a means of teaching, then wala akong problema na mag-increase yung Filipino language as a medium of instruction. Hindi lang pa pwede yung biglaan. Sa totoo lang, yung balance na sinasabi ko, sa ngayon, what is more effective for the students and the teachers?
Right.
As we develop the Filipino language, if it becomes a better alternative, then we should go for for the Filipino language.
Well, my concept of balance, this is just very short. My concept of balance would have to do with international schools using English as medium of communication or instruction. That perhaps we can concede. But for many universities, colleges, and schools wherein Filipinos are mainly the enrollees, then we have to make sure that Filipino is
it's skewed towards Filipino.
It's skewed towards
All right. We need to take a short break. Don't go away. When we come back, the results of our online poll on the issue and the final words of our guests. Stay tuned. You're watching Opposing Views. Welcome back. This is Opposing Views. I'm Rodney Pomoceno, and our guests, Representative Romulo and Professor Danilo Arao. And our debate question for tonight, should we promote Filipino more than English as the medium of instruction in schools? Now, Congressman Roman, your I guess your pitch for a more balanced, language, use of language, both English and Filipino, is it more, you mentioned earlier that you have to make them competitive, and that the point of Professor Dan is that we have to deepen the knowledge of our students in the Filipino language. But do you feel that by using English, is it more for, I guess, occupational reasons, or is it, do you personally feel that English is an intellectualized language and certain things can be taught in English which cannot be taught in Filipino? Do you think that by having that English as an option and pushing it will deepen the knowledge of our students?
Wala akong problema pag pinush ang Filipino and pag prepared na tayo for Filipino as a medium of instruction. Pero sa ngayon, tingin ko kailangan talagang balanse. May certain subjects na kailangan pagpatuloy natin ang pagtuturo sa English, pero siguro may mga subjects na pwede na nating ituro as a medium of instruction sa Filipino. Bakit? Unang-una, prepared na rin po ba tayo sa materials? There are materials na siguro kailangang iprepara pa kung talagang gagamitin natin ang Filipino. So in the meantime, habang wala pa rin po yun, siguro mas madali na at matututo yung ating mga kabataan kung yung medium instruction ay pareho doon sa librong nababasa nila. Sa ngayon, marami pa rin mga libro ay ang authors at yung pagkasulat ay sa English pa rin. So hindi natin pwedeng masakripisyo naman yung future ng ating mga kabataan. Kailangan natin ng balanse. Kailangan preparado rin. Kung walang materials rin, kung wala silang babasahin sa Filipino para matutunan yung subject matter, siguro yung mga yun, iwan na muna natin as taught in English.
Professor Dan, your thoughts on that?
Well, there's no debate that there should be adequate preparation, especially on the part of the faculty member, in order to ensure that he or she would be able to speak well in Filipino and to teach well using that particular language. Teaching materials, I believe, should be prepared, but this would be in the form of just simply doing direct translations of teaching modules. But I have to clarify that certain scientific terms or technical jargon could be retained as is, whether in English or in any other language, Latin for example.
Scientific terms have to be in
Exactly.
in Latin talaga.
Test tube, Bunsen burner, you could still use those
keep
terms.
that, no?
Yeah, but the point here is, I'm not saying that it should be immediately done, but there has to be political will on the part of the government to ensure that we would be able to implement the use of Filipino as the medium of instruction. We cannot just say that we have to let things by for now, because adequate preparation on one hand is important, but when will we do it? I mean, we have to do it now.
Professor Dan, there are some sectors who, in society who are asking also that the Filipino language, being a young language, as you cited examples earlier, Japanese, the Chinese, the Spanish, they have a language that's developed for, I guess, for maybe 400 years, 500 years, maybe 1,000 years. But for Filipino, it's essentially a young language, diba? I think 1935 was the time that Tagalog was kind of established as it's Filipino, it's the Filipino language.
Yeah. But
You
we have to, yeah.
go ahead.
I do understand where you're coming from. We concede that English is older than Filipino, okay? That much we can say. But to say that as a young language, it should take time to develop, it's not the age of the language that's important, it's how we embrace it as a nation. If our government officials would continue to insist that they would prefer to speak in English and to deal with people in English, then we have a problem. On one hand, it's good that the current president, President Noynoy Aquino, is using Filipino in the delivery of his, major speeches like the State of the Nation address. But it's not enough. I mean, even our judicial system is essentially in English. So there's a need to make the necessary reforms, not just at the education sector, but the different social sectors to ensure that we can properly embrace it.
Congressman Roman, you think the fact that we still have a fairly young national language, you think that that's the hindrance in perhaps mandating that the medium of instruction, for example, in tertiary level, should not be all in Filipino?
Well, siguro minor reason na lang yan for me. I don't think that is the major reason bakit siya hindrance. Talagang katulad na nabanggit ko kanina, talagang competing concerns eh. Yung concerns talaga na maging competitive ang Filipino, ang mga Pilipino maging competitive, at syempre ma-promote natin yung Filipino as a national language. Talagang yung dalawang concerns na yon, talagang minsan hindi natin mapagsabay ng buong buo. Talagang may degrees na may mauuna, may talagang sa ngayon, yun talaga siguro ang main hindrance.
Do you think though that we need, and we're about to wrap up now, but do you think there should be a really strong government campaign, for example? Because there seems to be a split, no?
Yes.
People are, and let's face it, if you're speaking English, you're kind of high class or in the higher level. And if not, if you're speaking Filipino, you're not, no? You're maybe medium or lower. Do you think that there should be a campaign, a national campaign to love and embrace Filipino, so that there won't be that abyss, no? There won't be that split in society where the English-speaking people are, the higher-ups and the richer ones, and the ones who are speaking Filipino are not. Do you think that we need a campaign like that?
Yes, in the long run. Pero sa ngayon po, dahil marapit na rin po yung mga ASEAN 2015, ang tingin ko at sana maging magandang usapin sa lahat ng sektor, siguro ngayon talaga balanse ang kailangan eh. We should be able to find a way that we promote Filipino as the national language without sacrificing our being competitive or our Filipinos being competitive. In the short term, yun na muna. Okay. Let's find a middle ground na we promote Filipino as a national language, sabay competitive yung ating mga mag-aaral. But in the long run and in the bigger picture, tama po yan. Let's promote Filipino really a lot. Pero kailangan natin ng mga short-term solutions.
Yeah. Professor Dan?
Of course, we have to define what balance is. And my problem with competition, especially at the global arena, is that once that becomes our mantra or our priority, then it follows that we have to speak more the language of our global competitors, and that would be English. And in fact, I can even counter-argue, Congressman, that if we want to be globally competitive, we have to learn English, Chinese, Japanese, right?
And there's nothing, trade partners. No?
Yeah, exactly. And there's nothing wrong with that because we have to learn, we have to be polyglots or multilinguals, and we have to encourage that. But as far as proficiency is concerned, I think we both agree that instead of focusing more on English proficiency, we have to strengthen Filipino proficiency.
All right. Just we have a few minutes just for final words. Professor Dan, your final thoughts on this subject matter.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, our goal here is to ensure that Filipino should be strengthened as a medium of instruction and that the courses taught in Filipino should be mainly the concern of our school administrators. And it's not just an issue of the courses related to Filipino being taken out in the tertiary education program as reflected in CHED Memorandum Order number 20. It's much deeper than that. We have to ensure that our culture, our sense of pride, and our sense of national identity will be maintained through the provision in the Constitution of Filipino being actualized in the education sector. Please note that the only reason I'm speaking in English is out of respect for the format in this particular show. Pero ang salalayan po talaga natin sa ating pakikibaka para sa mas magandang kinabukasan ay ang pagpapalakas po ng ating wika. Dito lang po natin makukuha ang makabuluhang pagbabago at ang klase ng edukasyon na hindi lang usapin ang pagkakaroon ng trabaho, kundi pagpapalalim po ng ating kaalaman. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Professor Danilo Arao. Thank you very much. And Congressman Romulo,
Yes.
your final words?
Rod, Professor Arao, unang-una maraming salamat dito sa pagkakataon na ma-discuss natin yung mga issue katulad ng Filipino as a national language. Alam po natin, hindi naman talaga sa maraming tao hindi sexy itong mga pinag-uusapan natin. Pero itong mga issue na ganito, napaka-importante po eh. Because sa pinag-uusapan natin dito talaga ay pagbabalanse ng mga concerns na kailangan talaga ma-address natin lahat. Sabay-sabay, dahil ito talaga makakatulong sa ating mga kababayan. Kaya muli po, maraming salamat.
All right. Thanks to our guests. Again, Representative Romulo and Professor Danilo Arao. Now let's feel the pulse of our viewers through our online poll. Our question, should we promote Filipino more than English as the medium of instruction in schools? Those who answered yes, 60%, and those who answered no, 40%. And that's our opposing views for tonight. Tune in again next week for another bold and engaging discussion on today's most relevant issues. I'm Roger Pumaceno. Good night. God bless. Happy weekend.